Okay. Ready, guys?
Yeah,
We'll just do it after three. Text George to say that when it comes back, we're just going to record now because I don't want to waste too much more time.
Okay. So what? Shall we go now then? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Well, all right. Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Right. Hello and welcome. There we go. Hello and welcome to Bournemouth University Politics Society's weekly podcast. Today is the 30th of September and we'll be discussing the first televised presidential debate between President Donald Trump and Joe Biden. My name is Finley Brown and here with me we have Aaron Goldsmith, Joshua Langham and George Rawlings. Right, do we want to discuss it? How do we all feel about last night's debate?
When I wasn't particularly expecting anything much, to be honest, from the debate. I thought it was going to be pretty lackluster, but even I couldn't have predicted just how boring and almost disappointing this debate was. Biden had a few moments where he looked quite promising, looking down the camera and addressing the audience as people rather than just rambling, as Donald Trump seems to be doing. There was no real substance. There was no real policy substance. Trump was pressed multiple times for a healthcare plan. It never really seemed to come out. And then it was just Biden trying to speak over Trump, and that never really working out as most people could have predicted.
Yeah, exactly that. Aaron, what do you think?
Well, I think it was a very interesting debate because what you have is you have two people who are very different game plans. I think Trump's whole idea was to try to dominate Biden, both vocally, as we very much saw, but also in terms of control in the debate and in the entire election wider. And I think that from a Trump perspective, he probably did exactly what he wants to do in the way he wants to do it. I think that he's already put out the narrative that he was up against the moderator. He put that on Twitter and also during the debate. So I think that with the base already not trusting the media, that's probably going to go towards his advantage. I think that though in a traditional debate sense, a lot of people would qualify Trump as having a bad performance and Biden really limited in what he could do. I think from a Trump perspective, he'd be coming out that somewhat happy with how the performance went.
That's interesting, considering the commentary afterwards, reading the criticisms of the debate. A lot of people have said that there was no real winner, and the only losers, as such, were the American people, the American electorate, being on the receiving end of such poor, low-caliber politicians representing them. A debate that was, I don't know, bigged up to carry a lot of substance and should have, with everything that's going on in US politics, global politics. I must say I agree with Josh in terms of it being very disappointing. Whether or not Donald Trump should be happy with how it's gone. Polls, a CBS News instant poll afterwards found that 48% thought that Biden had won and 41% Mr. Trump. So I don't know what you make of that.
Well, here's the thing is that with Trump, there's an expectation, I think, that something like this was going to happen. And it's almost like, I mean, in 2016, he polls-wise lost all the debates as well. But what we found is that, in my opinion, polls haven't really been able to track his type of political campaigning. We've seen that with the 2016 election and the 2018 midterms, where he campaigned statistically did better than when he didn't campaign. So I think that, and obviously that's probably a lot of people would expect that, but with the midterms, there was an expectation of a blue wave, and I mean, the Republicans gained in the Senate, gaining especially more votes where he campaigned. I think that the polls will tell you a certain thing, but the fact that both of them lost gives an advantage in the mind of the Trump campaign, because as long as Biden doesn't win, to them, that's an advantage to them.
I personally think that Trump's whole silent majority thing is probably wearing a bit thin at this point. People aren't going to be afraid to say that they're going to vote Trump in opinion polls when Trump's been the president for the last 3 years. He's seeming, people have become more probably comfortable in expressing their support for Trump as time goes on, because they don't have to be as worried about appearing to be socially maligned in a sense, because so many people now support Trump. It's not like such a niche view as it once was. I think what was really quite demoralizing about the whole debate was the fact that Andrew Yang, another sort of flag bearer for modern neoliberalism that Joe Biden really encompasses, even he admitted that the American people lost that debate. No one really won. So it's quite saddening to see that even the most ardent supporters of Joe Biden know that he didn't perform particularly well. What I thought was quite interesting about that debate was as well that Joe Biden, once again in his career, took a leaf out of someone else's book and set up a fact-checking thing on Twitter, similar to how the Tories did before some of the 2019 debates. At Truth on Twitter it was a Biden/DNC war room, I think it was called, production that was fact-checking some of Donald Trump's statements to them. Like, I think it's quite interesting that they've sort of leaned into this fake news narrative and are trying to use that against Donald Trump by portraying everything he's saying as a lie or just a piece of misinformation.
And would you say then Biden missed an opportunity in the actual debate to challenge Trump on those issues that were proven to be false?
I think he tried his best to, but when you're up against Donald Trump, whose art is really the spectacle, that's what Trump is there for, to make a spectacle and not really engage. When Biden pushed him for a healthcare plan, he declined to answer. When Biden pushed him for how he was going to end COVID, it was very lacking in substance, as has been said. I think that's the real problem that Biden will face, that Trump isn't like any other senator who Biden would have encountered during his time as vice president or as senator or any other foreign leader. Trump is only there to get the sound bites rather than discuss actual policy differences most of the time.
Yeah. Would you say that Biden got sucked in on it in terms of to Trump's level, in terms of the level of argument? Would you say he'd be disappointed? By the sounds of things, from what you've said, you might say that Biden did perform better than Trump. Certainly, I still would say that Biden has, in terms of how he's been received from the debate, he's performed a bit better. I don't know what you think of that.
I think he's come out a bit better, but still not brilliantly. He tried to consistently raise himself above Trump's level by looking down the camera and sort of delivering that, try and be charismatic and actually talk to people rather than just rambling. But then at the same time, drawing into petty insults about telling Trump to shut up really wouldn't have played well into his favour, I don't think. It just really drew the life out of the whole process and made really people not really want to watch anymore.
Mm.
I mean,
in terms of...
May,
go on.
Oh, sorry. If I may, I think this was very much Trump's debate to lose. So all he had to do was basically look more professional than Biden was, because of course Biden recently hasn't had a wonderful track record on his speeches, let's say. Yet I will say Biden's aggression in this one, I would say he was far more aggressive towards Trump than was probably expected, and I know some of you have pointed to that with some of the insults and stuff, especially when of course Biden tried to level issues of Trump being unpresidential and then him going on to say the very same insults. It did sort of bring him down to that level. So I have to admit, it did mean that some of his initial criticisms of Trump's, at the very least, demeanor were sort of flaccid to some degree. But maybe...
Sorry.
No, go on, please.
I'd like to draw on what George said of that it was Trump's debate to lose. I really don't think that was the case. That would imply that Trump has any semblance of popularity in America when he's losing. I know polls haven't been accurate in the past, but Trump is consistently shown as not being popular. The Republicans are losing basically every major battle of ideas in America at the moment. It really wasn't Trump's thing to lose. It was Trump's thing to try and not get battered in. And that's what really Trump managed to do, not get absolutely battered. But it certainly wasn't his to lose. He's in no position to even think that he's ahead at this point in the election.
You would say that going into this, it was a level playing ground, and then it was up to each candidate to seize the opportunity to gain voters. I was listening to something the other day that said, in terms of swing voters, that they don't think many people will swing. However, they do believe that where Biden can do well, increase the voter turnout. I don't know what you think of that.
Well, if I may come on to this, I think that this election is as much as this entire year is, it's going to be an unprecedented election because we have issues of more mail-in ballots and other things that the election may never have been called till days after. And there's a possibility that I've been hearing that there's Trump wins on the day, but Biden wins overall just due to the amount of mail-in ballots. And I think that with that comes a lot of questions over how things will go after, which was alluded to in the debate. But when it comes to Trump trying not to be obliterated, a lot of people, including very right-wing political commentators, were saying that all Biden needs to do is sound coherent, and he's probably won the debate. And the fact that you have a lot of people, like, for example, Andrew Yang, who are saying that no one won the debate, it almost was a potential for Biden to really grasp this election by the hands, and in the end, possibly increased likelihood due to the fact of Trump's behavior and the way that he conducts himself. It almost felt like a missed opportunity for Biden more than Trump. This, like I said, this was expected from Trump. We've seen it in the 2016 debates where he commented jabs, for example, you'd be in jail to Hillary. Right? This is something that people have seen a lot. It's kind of what you expect, and I think that a lot of people are saying that Trump does better in rallies rather than debates. Whereas Biden, we've seen him twice in vice presidential debates in 2008 and 2012 perform very differently to how he did then. And I think that he was a lot more coherent and charismatic then. Yes, he tried to look into the eye of the camera and talk to the American people, which I think is a strategy for him. But I think that entire debate was controlled by Trump and by the way that he was behaving, and that kind of limited the amount that Biden could do.
Yeah.
Would you say you briefly compared then to the 2016 election where Trump saw success in the televised debates? You mentioned sending Clinton to jail kind of thing. That received a lot of laughter and engagement from the audience. Trump never, in that debate last night, Trump never saw success in anything he said. Whereas Biden...
I do remember hearing at times from both candidates when they said things, there was a reaction from the audience of laughter or something like that. But I think that to say that Trump was successful in the last debate, I don't think is strictly true, because Hillary Clinton, poll-wise, did win all three debates from CBS and CNN and other poll sources. So I think that Trump was, like I said, is never going to probably be someone that's going to categorically win debates within polls, just because of the way he does it, so anti-politician that people don't really know how to react to it. And I think the way he behaves, pollsters don't really know how to poll. I mean, the Young Turks in 2018, who, let's be honest, aren't particularly any fans of Trump, one of them said that we don't know how to beat him and we don't know how to talk about him. And I think that categorically hasn't shifted much over the last 2 years. The question is that because, as we've said, that in the last decade, the polls haven't been very accurate, and there's been a lot of issues with how polls have been. Are they accurate now? Can we really trust them? I'm not particularly too sure. I think that Josh's comment about whether people will be more open to it is a very interesting one. I think that to an extent is accurate, because people feel as if that they can come out more as Trump. But I also believe that there is a lot of social stigma in certain areas about it. I mean, we've seen plenty of times where people have come out, especially when there's been, for example, right-wing speakers at universities, where there's been protests and different things about people speaking. So I think he's right, but not to the extent of where it's going to be completely even in polls.
I think for Trump to win a debate, all he really has to do is for Trump, it won't really matter about leading a poll, because the Republican Party always seems to lose the popular vote. For Trump, including an election, including debates, for Trump, all he really needs to do to win a debate is radicalize his base further. And I think that's what he succeeded in doing in 2016 with the Hillary jabs. And he's sort of done it a bit less effectively here, but he's still done the same. With the jabs about socialism, the jabs about going to prison, it really makes the people who would vote Trump already really helps cement them into that mindset. And that is why also they might be a bit more willing to say they're voting Trump in these polls, because they've been a bit more radicalized towards the idea of Trumpian politics by these constant insults and jabs. And I think that's what they really look. And when Biden talks about looking presidential, for these people who are hardcore Trump supporters, that's what they want in a president. They want someone who's going to be combative and go to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un and all these other leaders and be combative and not quite as internationalist as other leaders have been in the past. They want someone who's going to lead the attack against ideas that they personally don't like, lead the culture wars. So when Biden says, "Oh, he doesn't look very presidential," that's only Biden's idea of what a president should look like, and a liberal idea of what a president should look like talking to people, engaging in debates and stuff like that, which Biden has excelled in the past against Palin, for example. But otherwise, it just doesn't really make much sense, because Trump's fan base don't want a president like that. They want a president who will be willing to go on the attack.
Yeah, very interesting points. I think in terms of how the state of Trump's fan base are with regards to the pandemic and everything like that, revealing his competence in office. A lot of people have been encouraged by, a lot of people on the left anyway, have been encouraged by the fact that competency has been raised back up into the limelight in terms of discussions. With the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Supreme Court vacancy, that's kind of reminded the Republican base, Trump's base, of their ideological lines, as opposed to like opinions on competency in office and their jobs and their livelihoods, healthcare, things like that, in terms of how they get distracted or where they focus, how they think about who they will vote for. It's very interesting how that will play out, especially in the next few weeks. Yeah. Right, shall we talk about in terms of what actually happened in the debate? So I'll first bring up Trump's refusal to condemn white supremacist groups. It's got a lot of traction on social media. What do people make of that?
I think, if I may, on this one, it was that, to be fair, I remember when he was asked this question, he said, "What do you want me to say?" Like, quite a lot, and he was interrupted an awful amount on this.
Yeah.
So I reckon if he was given the chance, he would probably have given a reply. But
yeah.
To be honest, it's I don't know. It did seem as if there was a lot of overlap when people were talking about this issue. He never really got a chance to properly answer it. So it's hard to think of it as a conscious way to avoid the question, because it did seem he was attempting to at least address the question somewhat.
But if I can add to that, they asked him to condemn and asked them to tell them not engage in any civil unrest, which from what I watched the debate live, I think that's what he did. He told them to stand back and not engage.
Do you think he went far enough in that? Do you think he went far enough?
Well, so the question is, though, did he go far enough? How far can you go? He said the word "stand down." Which, I mean, he probably could have said, "I don't support you." Probably would have been better. Probably would have gone further. But he said something. which is something that a lot of people have criticised him about. Compare that to Biden, who still isn't condemning Antifa.
Yeah, but the difference between the Proud Boys and Antifa is that Antifa isn't a organisation in the same way that Proud Boys are. So it's a lot more difficult to and also, if Biden came out on national TV and said, "I don't like anti-fascists," then that'd be horrible in the press for him. And it doesn't. What many people took from the Trump thing is when he said "stand by" and "stand down" to the Proud Boys. That's probably just a Trump slip. But when he says "stand by," that almost makes it sound like he's going to want to do stuff in the future, which was the view that some people took. Not the view that I took personally, because I think that's just a Trump slip of the tongue. Because I think Trump knows that actively pandering to white supremacy might gain him some votes somewhere, but it will lose him more moderate votes. So yeah.
But I guess I understand what you're saying about the organisation, but all he has to say, and this is just my view, and you can disagree with it, but all he has to say is that I condemn the violence from Antifa. It's a very simple things to say, and he was asked about it. Trump told him to say it, and he refused. He didn't do it, and I don't think anyone's really going to call it out, unfortunately.
I think on that, Bill, totally sorry to interrupt.
That's
just quickly, I would say that I think when he said, in reply to the asking me to condemn Antifa, of which is in practicality an organisation. Of course, his reply was, "Oh, it's just an idea," and of course that's how Antifa wishes to see itself. But that's what most anarchist organisations do. So it's not quite as, especially for moderates. I think this organisation, which it does indeed promote violent action. I imagine most people who are undecided, it won't go in the favour of Biden for him to avoid that question, or at the very least play into a perception of Antifa, of which Antifa has of itself, other than most moderates, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think...
And George, you mentioned the point of, in terms of the mediator, Chris Wallace, and Fox News anchor, and the pressing of Trump and interruption of him when in his response to that. How well do you think he did throughout the whole debate in terms of mediating the two?
The moderator, at the very start, I thought he was awfully aggressive towards Trump, but then later on, he was also a little bit combative with Biden. So I'd say that he was not too bad actually. He was a little bit, of course, combative, but then again, the entire bit was rather combative itself. So he fit the environment, I'd say. So, I mean, I guess either side probably wishes to condemn the moderator, because moderators are always condemned by either side. But I have to say, I mean, he's not perfect, but he did, in some point, phrase questions in such a way that was more of a question where you couldn't really answer the question without denigrating your own point, I have to say. So some of the questions, at least the phrasing of them, wasn't particularly pleasant for a few of them. But other than that, I would say the moderator did a fairly equal job, give or take, other than, of course, when it comes to the multiple chances to, I guess it's rather hard to contain the overlap of the argumentation, is that they always keep speaking over each other. So I have to admit, at some point, he really should have stepped in a little bit harsher than he should have and made sure that he heard answers to every question. But of course, that's hard to do. So
I think what really needs to be done next time is the people who are in charge of sound should probably just mute the mic of the person not talking. Because I think that would really make such a simple thing, would make it seem so much more presidential. Like if you only hear one person talking at a time, and that really sort of plays badly against Trump, because he likes going in there with those quick jabs, those quick little insults that aren't really part of anything. That's how he functions. But I really think it would work a lot better if they mute the mic of the person not talking. So therefore, that people are just hearing the person talking rather than just both of them kind of clashing at the same time.
Yeah, I do agree. In terms of how my opinions after it, and also after 2016, and also in the UK election, televised debates, I've largely been disappointed in terms of a gauge of competency in office. I don't think they're a good measure or an effective measure of how they will do. I much preferred actually when they, I know in the UK election, they did like a 1-to-1, and just an interviewer was asking questions to, for example, the Green Party leader, and that was so much more thorough, in depth, and it gave you a lot more of a chance to actually get to know the candidate, get to know what they stand for. Not that you already don't. Obviously, with Biden and Trump in America and the state of the US media, they report so much about the personality of the candidates. But I do think that when they just talk over each other and it's just argumentative and they're almost like children fighting, there's nothing really to get from it, other than who's performed the worst, or any blunders or any insults. For example, will you shut up, man? Biden shouting that to Trump. That's got a lot of headlines, as opposed to what maybe should have. I don't know what you've got to say about that, Aaron.
Well, I think that 100% I agree. I love good old one-to-one interviews, and I think that a big issue with televised debates is that it's very difficult for people to be put on by interviewers, and very difficult to fact check and things like that, just due to the fact that obviously everyone's going to say, oh no, that's not true, that's a lie, or something like that. And I think that is decreased trustworthiness politicians, because everyone just says you're a liar, no, you're a liar, and there's no real proper intellectual conversation. It's just people, just saying words to each other when they say something that the other person disagrees with. But equally, I think that historically TV debates in America have proven to be very effective. If you look at the history of it from, was it 1960, the first one, which was between John F. Kennedy and Nixon? You had people who watched the TV debate and said that Kennedy won, and people who heard it on radio said that Nixon won. So it generally does have a massive impact, and I think that that's the reason why they'll probably never get rid of it. There are such moments as Reagan, throughout all of his debates, with his humor. You have the famous locked box with Al Gore versus Bush, and obviously Bush Senior, who kept on looking at his watch, and different things, which just gives perceptions. And I think that that's why they're so important, because you can kind of see how people react rather than specifically what they're saying.
Yeah. I do agree.
I think the thing about one-on-one debates is that there's no one really in America quite, because obviously the one-on-one things here were hosted by Andrew Neil. I don't think there's any real interview in America who could quite as rigorously interview them as someone like Andrew Neil, who is quite useful. I think that'd be quite a useful thing, getting both the presidential candidates in a room with a really competent interviewer who really has researched it and knows their stuff. But again, I just know neither of the presidential candidates would be able to stand up to it. I don't think either of them really have the detail or the ability to stand up to someone like that. As we saw with I don't know if anyone saw the Ben Shapiro interview with Andrew Neil, but that was really quite an embarrassment as someone who's normally portrayed as quite a good debater against Andrew Neil. And I think even against the presidential candidates, it'd be even worse than that. It'd just be a horror show.
That is something I'd love to see.
I would love to see Andrew Neil go to the States and destroy them all. But to add to that, I think that one of the big issues that they have in America that we don't particularly have in the UK, at least theoretically, is that within American news channels, all of it is so political that everyone can, if you're right wing, you're just going to completely devalue the interviews done with CNN, NBC, ABC, etc. And if you're left wing, you're just going to completely devalue the interviews with Fox News. And because you have that, and in the UK we have institutions that present themselves to be unbiased, like the BBC, to an extent ITV and Sky, more so than the others. What you have is you have the ability for more rigorous debate interviews, right? Because you have people who, at least on the outside, are considered to be people who are, no matter who it's going to be, stick it on them. Whereas in America, you're going to have people who will be slightly more kinder to others because of their political standing.
Yeah, I do think watching the debate last night that it made me appreciate the UK system a lot more in terms of how we are polite, in terms of right honourable gentlemen in Parliament, and the etiquette and how we are. And often I disregard the traditions in Parliament, like the archaic stuff and everything like that. But the level of respect that we have in the UK, I think that the US could maybe learn a few lessons from. George, I don't know if you had anything to say as well.
Actually, I would say something about definitely how we would do interviews over here, and I'm not sure if it's the same interview about Ben Shapiro and Andrew Neil. I have to admit that actual interview, if we're speaking about the same one, was actually quite an example of how interviews have gone wrong. As in, if I recall, it was a interview focused on, well, it was meant to be focused at the very least on his new book, on which I believe Ben Shapiro is attempting to be a little bit more professional in how he deals with political ideals, and all he got in return were for an attempt to be a bit more out of his comfort zone, if you will, trying to deal with actual political theory, was to get hammered on his things when he was young. Of course, he was in politics for an awfully long time, and I think that sounds very much more like an American debate than it would be a more European one, as as if anything, it's more of just about general character attacks, and instead of defending a specific ideal or philosophy or thought, or in that case book, you end up having to defend your entire life's work, or anything you've ever said, instead of just the very specifics of whatever that specific topic is. And then, of course, in certain debates, you can't have large-scale discussions on everything you've ever done, and if you do attempt to do such things as that, you end up getting very thinly laced in way of values in the form of debate, where it becomes more of just about attacks and arguments and getting sound bites. As of course, you can't realistically, without having multiple hours on end, have a proper discussion and debate about someone's entire life's work and every single issue they've ever done compared to one issue. So I mean, maybe we're talking about different discussions.
No,
however, I think it wasn't necessarily the best example, but I understand what you mean.
When I watched that Ben Shapiro interview with Andrew Neil, the one that was last year, they were talking about Shapiro's new book, which was entirely about right-wing politics, and the things Andrew Neil questioned him on were whether there were any new ideas in the American right wing, their stance on abortion, I think maybe their stance on gun control. That wasn't attacking Shapiro's entire history. That was attacking three very specific things that were all mentioned in detail in his book, expecting him to be able to defend those ideas, which is exactly what Andrew Neil does in the UK.
Well, maybe I maybe remembering a different one, because I remember him going back and just repeating him quotes of what he said in the past, and then having him defend each quote. I remember seeing that specific.
Yeah.
Maybe that was a different one.
I think we'll bring it back on track and discuss Trump's taxes. That's been in the news this week. New York Times have reported that Trump has been, what was it, 750,000 paid tax instead of...
No, it's just 750.
750. There you go.
Yeah.
And then when questioned on it in the debate, he said, "No, I pay my taxes," or he said a few things in the past. I wonder what we made of it.
I think it's.
Sorry, go.
I think it'll be quite a good soundbite for the Biden campaign, because that's roughly the amount of income tax that a median wage employee earns. So it's quite an easy way to say, "Oh, your president pays less tax than you. Are you really sure you want this man to be your president?" It's like basically a campaign ad already written for them.
Well, here's the interesting thing about it, is that also he said that he pays millions in tax. I genuinely have no idea if that's even within the system. He said he releases tax returns, which I think would be interesting. If he actually does that, and B, what they actually be. But I think the most interesting thing is that a lot of people, I mean, his base, simply put, do not get. Because I follow a lot of left-wing people and a lot of right-wing people online. Obviously, I see what they say, but people are saying, like, I don't know if you guys know who Charlie Kirk is. But he was saying that the person who released his tax returns committed a federal crime and should be prosecuted, which I find absolutely fascinating. But yeah, the people who support him genuinely do not care, which I think suggests a level of partisanship and a level of following that's probably never been seen in American politics, or at least in modern American politics.
Yeah.
Well, I think if I... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, you
I
can
was going
go.
to add something very small onto that.
Go on, George. Yeah, go on, George.
It was just the fact that how he answered the question, I don't think worked specifically well for him, because when he was asked specifically how much, I believe it was income tax you paid, he said, I pay a lot of taxes. And he would never specifically state how much income tax specifically he pays. And I think, especially just how that instant reaction, it definitely felt as if he was trying to avoid the question and focus on in general taxation. And I would say for moderate people on the fence, that doesn't look particularly good. Sorry.
Yeah. I think one of the things is that Aaron mentioned about how we're remapped to his base, but his base is quite small. Let's not forget he lost the popular vote in 2016. I think Trump's base, like his hardcore base, is maybe 25% of the electorate at this point. For all the moderates, I think that will be a really big, especially for like moderate fiscal conservatives. I think that might be quite a big talking point that Trump pays so little tax. Yet he's still trying to cut taxes for the richest of people. Will really hit home for Americans who are fundamentally struggling at this stage in the midst of a pandemic and the midst of one of the worst recessions in history. Although it's obviously growing back now. You say
that though, but Trump's tax returns and all this was a fixture in 2016. I mean, Hillary Clinton specifically brought up in the debate, which Trump commented, "That makes me smile."
Yeah, but
it's something that if people are surprised by this, I think that they didn't particularly listen to the last election.
I don't think it's the... Sorry.
No, you
go on, Josh.
I don't think it's the people are surprised by it, but now they've got sort of an actual number to put on it. It's all very well and good talking about figurative things like taxes, but that's quite an abstract thing. When you hear the number $750 and then you see Trump bragging about being a billionaire or whatever it is, that's quite a big gap between those two things. I think that's what might make it a bit more effective this time around, that they know that it's probably not just some theoretical number. It could actually just be $750 that he paid in income tax, which will really help hit at home.
So really, it's up to the Democrats and Biden to capitalize on this and really make use of, well, not a slip up as such from Trump, but there's an opportunity there definitely for Biden and Democrats to maybe turn voters' heads and turn them to the Democrats. Who knows? Right. Any other opinions on that, George?
Yes, I would probably say that you're probably incorrect in the fact that it doesn't specifically matter about the hardliners. You know, I reckon the hard left and hard right are going to vote either way, even if they don't like the person. So, for example, most people who support Bernie are probably still going to vote left, even if they dislike Biden. They're going to vote practically to some degree. So I would say that these debates, if they are going to win over anyone, they have to try to attempt to win over the undecided vote. And I would say little things like this will build up against Trump. However, I would also say that Biden's sort of mixed attempt, I would say. He did do some good things where he condemned political violence to some degree. And I think that definitely works out better. I was surprised in how much he did go out to do that. So I'll say that definitely works well for him and how he's moving a little further away from the further extremes of his party, which is good because I think that would be a nice way to rake in the more centre votes. And that's basically what he needs, is just to tip it just a little bit more what he needs to kick it over at the end, if you could compare it to the last election. So I would say that Trump may guarantee his section of the vote, but I would say that it's a more important element is how they appeal just to the centre. Of course, it's not specifically a sexy topic, but it is something. You know, the more moderates ones, the undecided ones, are probably going to pick the election. Especially in America, this tends to be how it goes, isn't it?
And something that is probably more sexy, as you put it, the swing states, Arizona, Florida, and Texas. I was listening to something the other day discussing all three. I wonder what you have to make of those.
Well, if I may take this first, because I've been studying and analysing the situation within the swing states. And I think that Texas is a state that for sure within the next 10 years, within this decade, is likely to switch. I just think that there's going to be a slight hold on within this election. I think with Arizona, there is a big risk that it's going to switch, because I mean it was not called immediately last time, but this was John McCain's old Senate seat, so you don't know. It really depends. I think that a lot of people are banking on minorities to go and support Biden, but I
The
don't think
Hispanic
that
vote. Yeah.
Hispanic vote and African, because also there's talk within Georgia due to the African American vote. But I don't think I don't know, because especially within the African American vote, I think that Trump is doing better than he did last time. This is just partly due to people like Candace Owens, Rob Smith, the whole Brexit movement, and especially because the economic prosperity of the African American community. I mean, unemployment prior to Corona was at the lowest in history. I think that his vote is going to go towards Trump because I saw a poll. I don't know how accurate it is, so take this with a grain of salt. But I saw a poll stating that 66% of Spanish voting people preferred Trump in the debate. And I think that just generally a lot of people underestimate, for example, the Cuban community, which does tend to vote more Republican than Democrat. I think that he's going to, with 4 years and very little comments about the Latino community specifically, I think that there's a possibility he may grow votes in those areas. But what I think the most important thing is if the Republicans lose, because I think Florida, no matter what, is always going to be a 50-50 state. It doesn't matter. I think it's always going to be a 50-50 state. It's been that way since, I mean, historically, it's always been that way. The interesting thing is, hypothetically, let's say that the South flips, because we have to remember that South wasn't always Democrat. Sorry, wasn't always Republican. It was Democrat years ago. Can the Republicans, and specifically Trump, keep the Rust Belt and make waves into the northern states? Let's not forget, at the beginning of this century, New Jersey was a swing state. In 2004, for example, a lot of people thought that it may flip. So I think that if that happens, we have to see the northern states, because everyone's saying that they could be the last time it's ever going to be a Republican president. That it always seems to go one way or the other between the north and the south. So.
Yeah, Josh, what do you think?
I think the thing about swing states is quite interesting because, as Aaron said, states can really quickly turn from quite safe strongholds to swing states, or vice versa. And I think that's what Trump did quite well in 2016, really securing those Rust Belt seats, those working class seats, or those working class electoral college votes, which is really what Biden needs to do this time around. And you can see it in part of his rhetoric, like with his Build American ideas, that is basically out of the Trump playbook. He's clearly trying to get those votes in the Rust Belt that he knows he will need to carry him over the line. That being said, if he wins Texas and keeps California and New York, he's basically got the election in the bag at that point. The three big electoral college bastions, almost, because that's where the most electoral college votes come from. That'll really, really help him if he can win Texas, and then it won't matter so much if he loses a few smaller states.
Well, it does very much depend, because what Trump got 312 electoral votes last time?
Yeah, something like that.
Minus like 35, that's still within. Basically, Trump, what he has to do is he can afford, no matter what state it is, he can afford to lose one state. And if that's Texas, if he keeps the Rust Belt, he's still in power. What matters, Biden has to win at least, I think, 3 states to secure victory. That's specifically if Texas goes blue. Texas goes blue, he can get 2. If it doesn't go blue, he needs to win Pennsylvania and Michigan, and
No,
ideally either North Carolina or Wisconsin.
no, that's not true. Trump won 304 electoral college votes last time, and Texas is worth 36. And if you need 270 to win, then if he wins Texas and keeps every other vote the same, then Biden would win the election.
Yeah.
I'm just getting up 270 to win. Sorry.
So if they kept every single vote the same, but Texas flipped, Biden would win the election. That's not going to be the case because so many other states or other places might vote Biden instead of Trump.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting. We mentioned the Hispanic vote, but I've been disappointed in recent elections with Hispanic vote is talked about a lot, but in terms of the actual impact it's had, whereas this year, due to the loss of manufacturing jobs, Hispanics had a lot of manufacturing jobs, and they've now moved into the hospitality, so restaurants, adopting jobs there. And because of the pandemic affecting hospitality so much, I'll be very interested to see if this election, what will the Hispanic voters do, and especially in those 3 states that we've just talked about. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. Right, we'll bring it back to the debate, and I'll just talk about so Biden in terms of the successes that have come from it and the reactions from the debate, looking down the camera, and obviously talking about his son Beau, that hit home emotionally with a lot of voters, a lot of the audience that watched, and then obviously Trump was brought up, Biden's other son Hunter, condemning his drug abuse and things like that, which was arguably a low blow by some critics. I wonder what you thought of all of that.
Well, I think that certainly Biden, you could see he was getting very emotional when talking about his son Beau. But the reason why Hunter was brought up, and I don't think he should have been brought up over his drug use, but the specific reason it was brought up was because there are reports that he was taking money from Russia, which is what Trump alluded to multiple times. Now, obviously, Biden is going to defend his son and defend it and say it didn't happen. But I think that Trump really should have stayed more on that message that he's taken these bribes from Russia. No one really knows what he's done with it. There's been
Ukraine, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
There's been Trump wants to do with Ukraine. This was specifically the wife of the mayor of Moscow.
Yeah.
And there've been people speculating that it was to do with trafficking and all sorts. So I don't think Trump could bring that specifically up in a debate. But I don't know the impact it's truly going to have because. Obviously, Biden was very. I mean, you can see he was choking up and almost sounded like he was going to cry when talking about Beau. But I think that the fact that Trump specifically turned it immediately from Beau to Hunter without even mentioning Beau, kind of not really upped him, but kind of lowered the effect it would have because it would send messages immediately. That's not what he's referring to. And I think that was specifically a play by Biden to try to get that support.
Well, Biden knows that Beau is a big seller almost in terms of he fought for America when obviously the patriotism in the US is so high. I think that it plays into his hand, but very well. And Trump knows that if he comments or criticizes that there is no way that can be turned positively for him. So deflecting it back onto his other son, deflecting it, avoiding any conversation regarding that is probably the only way that Trump could have come out of that situation positively, I would say. I don't know if Josh or George, you want to comment on any of that?
I mean, talking about Biden and the various strengths and negatives he had throughout, I would say he did have a little bit of mixed messaging when it came to the economy and COVID. In the way that he was criticising Trump for, of course, the economic damages that COVID had, while also saying that we need to they need to maintain a lockdown for longer. And it does. Of course, both those things he can support, but it is also a little bit of a mixed messaging for his side at the very least, because he's condemning him specifically. Oh, you've hurt the economy. But then he's like, oh, but then you haven't forgot people. And of course, earlier on as well, especially for the early criticism Trump had for blocking from China stuff. It definitely play well. Oh, sorry, can you hear me correctly?
Yeah, it was.
You can now, yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, sorry. So Biden and his side's original criticism of the movement from China to the US, it definitely doesn't help him on the COVID issue, and especially the economic issue around the lockdown. So either way, he's trying to play both sides while he's not committing to one, I would say, in the debate.
There was another example of this when he said, a lot of people talk about it, he said, I am the Democrat Party. And then the moderator called him out specifically, if he's the Democratic Party, why he's not trying to intervene. Because he said, I'm not in office, if you call yourself the Democratic Party, surely that wouldn't have an impact on whether you'd have influence. And I think that question itself and the way the moderator responds to that is going to play some doubts into people's minds, especially on such a big issue.
Yep. Josh, anything to say?
Quite quick. I think the thing about Biden seeing himself as the party, in a sense, is kind of emblematic of the presidential system, in much the way that Trump has transformed the Republican Party to be about himself. So I don't think that will have too much of an impact on the election. But it's been really interesting talking about everything. And
yeah. Right. Wonderful. So this was the Bournemouth University Politics Society, our first podcast. It was a special edition talking about the first US election debate. We'll be back every week from now on, discussing the previous week's politics, probably with large reference to US politics in the run-up to the election. And we'll have a varied number of guests, different speakers as well, discussing issues. Right, thank you very much.